Welcome to the TRICHOMES Weekly Roll Up, where we cover the latest in legalization topics and cannabis news headlines. A U.S. professional track athlete who had been barred from performing in the 2021 Olympic Games in Tokyo, Japan, after testing positive for cannabis use, is contesting a new ruling to permit a figure skater from the Russian Olympic Committee to compete in the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, China, even after testing positive for a forbidden performance-enhancing substance. Missouri State Representative Ron Hicks introduced the Cannabis Freedom Act, which, if approved, this proposal would legalize recreational cannabis statewide, discharge all nonviolent cannabis criminals, and permit those on supervised release to consume cannabis lawfully. Washington, D.C. recently passed legislation that allows senior citizens to enroll as medical cannabis patients without the need for a physician's referral and establishes a medical cannabis tax alleviation holiday that aligns with 420, the informal cannabis celebration. And now, here are your hosts, John Bond and Jared Duggins.
Hey,
what's happening, dude?
How you doing? Informal celebration of 420. I thought there was something. I thought we recognized that day. You know, hot dogs have their own day. Why can't we have our own day? What's going on here?
That's what I'm saying. I think there's probably a couple more boxes to check there, but I think we'll get there eventually.
All right.
One of these days.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Man.
So, hey, we're back for another Friday. Thanks for tuning in from Oregon. How goes it up there?
It's good, man. It's a beautiful sunshiny day. I think we're looking at like 50 degrees ish. The mountains still got snow on it, so I think I'm getting up there tomorrow for a little spring riding. But yeah, it's a great day. How's sunny Southern California?
You know, it's good. It can't decide what it wants this week. Last week it was we had winds gusting and it got up to 90 degrees. And this morning walked out and it was 39 degrees. So you know, it's all over the place. Much like Southern California, kind of in this winter and spring transition here. You know.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I don't miss the Midwest not making its mind up on weather. One day it's like 15 degrees, the next day it's like 85.
Right.
So at least like there's a little smaller variable there in the Northwest, so it's not terrible.
Yeah, no, I lived in Montana. I think I told you for about a year, and they call it big sky country up there. And if you don't like the weather, just wait around 15 minutes. You know.
Totally.
It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Right on.
Absolutely.
Well, hey. To jump right into it, you know, I wanted to point out the fact that the first story we have is international story. It's not even a federal story or just here. It's an international story concerning the Olympics. And the first component of the story is Sha'Carri Richardson, and a lot of our viewers will remember her from way back. We had a great response to this, where Sha'Carri was not allowed to participate in the Olympics based upon her use of cannabis prior and testing positive for that illegal substance, you know, illegal in that area, and against the doping committee rules and that kind of stuff. Well, fast forward to this Olympics, and we've got someone who is participating on the Russian team by the name of, I'm going to butcher this, Kamila Valieva, and realistically, she's been brought up for a performance enhancing drug, which is, again, it's part of this conversation. And really, you know, I'd like to preface this with, you know, John and I aren't part of WADA. We do not know the international doping agencies, you know, rules and regulations in and out and all that kind of stuff. But realistically, we've got something here that involves cannabis, involves an athlete that's using cannabis. And we've got something that looks like, well, there might be a difference in how someone's being treated based upon they also use drugs, and then they were allowed to be able to participate in the Olympics. And right now, Sha'Carri Richardson is pointing to the fact that it could be something of a race issue, and WADA is over here saying, hey, you know what? This person, Valieva, is a minor. She's 15 years old, and she's a protected class of athlete. Well, that's why we allowed her to participate.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's probably a lot of factors playing into it.
Right.
All of the above are probably true. You know, the tough thing in this scenario is it's another example of the way cannabis is looked at in mainstream media and just globally in terms of like the vilification of the plant, right? And you think about like the reason that there's like the reason that WADA even exists in terms of like folks participating in athletic competition at the highest level, right?
Right.
Is to prevent folks from having an unfair advantage over another person because of whatever particular substance they want to put into their body. Now, if cannabis were to be determined as now, listen, as someone that's been an athlete my whole life, I was a scholarship athlete in college for that matter. Cannabis has been a very big part of my life. And I will even say that it enhanced my mental state, which also improved my performance because of things that I used the plant for from like a medical standpoint, right? But when you talk about like physical strength, the ability to go at a higher clip of like exertion for a longer period of time, that's what WADA is there to protect against. And there's so many different things that are completely wrong about this scenario, and I'm very curious to see like what the answer is going to be from the establishment, as I should say, right? Because ultimately, there's really not a good one in my mind why one person should be and all of the above, right? There's a lot of different reasons why that could be happening. Not one of them is a good reason. And so I'm very curious to see what the response is there. And folks like, Sha'Carri Richardson, who is a world-class talent, like a once in a generation type of talent in terms of athleticism, should be held to a standard that others are not. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Well, and with that, again, we're bringing this as part of the weekly roll up, and really, we want to turn it back out to you, who's with us live and who will be watching this later. Is what do you think? Weigh in the comments as far as what you think was going on during these Olympics and why this may be happening, where one person gets to compete after using a performance enhancing drug, and while hey, John just admitted to the fact that cannabis can be used in a sports enhancing and mindful enhancing way and be used for ways to enhance yourself. It wasn't looked at that way by the doping commission, right? It's not seen that way as of right now. So how can they let someone compete after finding out they used a drug that's seen as enhancing versus a drug that wasn't? I almost wonder if it's the country of origin, right? We're seen as this leader in the way people look at things and all this kind of stuff, and we still federally hate cannabis. I mean, even during that Sha'Carri Richardson thing, I think we were looked at, or I remember a quote coming from the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, stating that it's the U.S.'s antiquated views on cannabis that really leads the world's views on cannabis, right? So the fact that this happened here with Sha'Carri, right, versus in the Olympic Games with Valieva, maybe that has something to do with it as well. But again, I see people starting to weigh in on the comments already. Please, I would love to see the comments, love to see you guys weigh in on this, because we're just here as reporting the news and kind of and calling out the double standards, as people are starting to allude to over there. And hey, Philip from Texas, just want to say what up. Here we grow wicked. Thanks for everybody tuning in. Love to see you guys in the comments every week, every morning on the buzz and that kind of stuff. But yeah, thanks a lot for checking in. So we'll leave that one there. You guys get on in the comments and that kind of stuff. But next we go to
Missouri,
to your neck of the woods. Yeah.
Home state. There we go. So in quick update, Missouri, I know we've talked about it quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, but the Cannabis Freedom Act is the product of input of many different stakeholders. Law enforcement and during incarceration conduct that society now deems acceptable. And so to catch everyone up, the Cannabis Freedom Act is policy that's being introduced in Missouri that is going to not only make adult use legal in the state of Missouri, but also expunge the records of folks based on a constitutional change that have been locked up for nonviolent cannabis crimes, which is a massive deal. And so, in terms of like, any adult, in terms of like the cultivation side, any adult can cultivate up to 12 plants for personal use. So when you think about what that represents versus what has existed, I think it's currently 4 under the medical program. And then in terms of like, the ability for police to have a warrantless search and seizure, they would not be able to do that based on the odor of cannabis any longer, which is also a really big deal. So you've seen a lot of the negative press around like no-knock warrants and things of that nature. I think this falls right into that same category, and it's really exciting to see, at least in my opinion, things start to move in that direction. And hats off to the state of Missouri for taking a different approach here versus what I've seen in other states in terms of like making things happen,
Right.
and being able to like be the change that they want to see, right? Versus like waiting on federal legislation to change and the big businesses that are funding the pockets to make those decisions. It's a lot better to see things happening on the state and local level, without a doubt.
Definitely. With this vote, what do you think would hold it up?
So I've got a couple friends that own businesses in Missouri. Obviously, with a ton of customers there. The only thing I think that can hold it up is not having enough signatures. I think that there's groups out there getting signatures, and they're getting close to the number that they need to get to. And there's been a ton of money raised behind those ballot initiatives on that side of it. And so it's really just a matter of getting it to see its day in our legislative system, because ultimately, like, there's a lot of Republicans that are behind it in the state of Missouri, which is atypical for most states in terms of like cannabis and stance on cannabis. And usually that's where you're going to find the difficulty in swaying folks, is not necessarily Republican versus Democrat, but like if one political party feels one way and the other feels the other, the majority representation in that state is usually going to weigh heavier from that side of it. So I don't see it getting held up, to be honest. I think it's going to happen this year.
Gotcha. I see Trevor up there commenting about the highest prices of cannabis in the country. I'm wondering if that has to do with the way the medical program was implemented versus what they're trying to do to change things and that kind of stuff. Again, I'm not on the ground there, boots on the ground there, so I'm not particularly sure what that is. But
sure.
Can you attest to the highest? Is that something that you see over there, John? Higher prices in Missouri on the medical side?
I wouldn't say it's specific to Missouri. I would say limited license medical markets are always going to be higher, specifically because the patient base and folks that you're selling products to is such a smaller subset. That being said, there's absolutely companies that take advantage of the fact that limited license markets exist, and they
Right.
charge that, but the taxation setup is also one that you have to build those in. And so those things kind of level out as adult use starts to come and there's more transactions and tax revenue for the state to start changing those policies. By the way, I appreciate the correction there. Medical plant limit is 6 in the state of Missouri, not 4. So Trevor, I appreciate that correction there. But yeah, you're exactly right. It is obviously an expensive, but at the end of the day, like, that's not unique to just Missouri from that side of it.
Right.
There's going to be any limited license market where it's medical only. You've got a smaller customer base. You're going to have to charge more to keep the doors open for the dispensary.
Yeah. And it seems to be just kind of the process that the states are choosing to go along this route of legalization prior to federal acceptance is ease the medical in and then go after the recreational stance with the rest of the state, really. So as per historically, it seems to be just part of the painful process, unfortunately, Trevor. But it brings up to point, that there's other places that are starting to put things into perspective when it comes to taxes and the next steps and that kind of thing. San Francisco just lowered their taxes from 8% to 2%. I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering that story correctly. I'm pretty sure it was 8% to 2% there. And when it comes down to it, you've got places like Washington D.C., our next story, that are getting it a little bit more. But really, we posted this on our TikTok earlier, and TikTok really had a lot to say about it. There's a little bit more of I would call it a younger crowd on TikTok. And one of the first comments that came out was ageism, right? It's like, do you need to be 65 to be able to choose how you want to medicate yourself? Is that the age of responsibility? Or, it's kind of funny how things are coming about now, and how certain groups are beginning to choose and pick other certain groups that can be allowed access first and foremost, rather than just saying, hey, you know what, medical community, if you're over the age of 21 and choose this as an alternative medicine, guess what? You shouldn't have to pay taxes on it, and it should be available to you. and really, I think people are starting to get sick of it on that level. But these states, and I know Phil Kingfish over there is in Texas. There's still states like Texas that you go to jail over a few grams. So it's one of those things that, as they're experiencing in Missouri, and you're experiencing, the other end of the spectrum in Texas, you've got places like Washington D.C. trying to do these different movements forward, and essentially, now you've got people who are, I guess, protected class. I used that earlier in regards to the Olympics. Now senior citizens over the age of 65 will not be required to receive a doctor's prescription, because you know what? We just believe everybody over 65. You know what? You get to use it. Again, is this a fair thing, John? What do you think? What says you about that?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of time and effort being put into policies that aren't necessarily moving the needle one way or another, depending on how you feel about the plant, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's exciting to know that that they're making that available for folks that are over the age of 65. I think if you looked at the data and the demographics of folks that consume cannabis on a regular basis, that's not going to move the needle in terms of like folks getting access to cannabis that didn't have it prior, because a lot of folks, and again, not a generalization, but again, there's data to support the idea that the majority of cannabis consumers are between the ages of like 18 and 41 on that side of it. So it's exciting. It's obviously a step in the right direction. Love to see progressiveness there by any sense of the word. But coming out of DC in the heart of where everything could change in such a greater capacity, I haven't spent a ton of I spent a ton of time in my life not taking handouts and thinking that, oh, gee, thank you for the crumbs, when we could be waiting on the entire slice of bread. That, I'm not grateful for small incremental things that don't move the needle that much personally. Right. But that's just who I am, as a person.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely it's that time period, right? And as someone who's been doing the coalition stuff and been part of the movement for 10, 11 years and that kind of thing, it's tough to gauge which one of these minor movements forward is going to catch a little bit of momentum and go forward. So, it would have been nice had we had a coalition of everybody, it was a central meeting spot for everybody kind of moving the needle in their different areas, so that essentially we as a community could align on what we thought was best first and then present it in such a fashion. But there's so many different, and I'll call them special interest groups, just because they are, even within our community, that have different points of concern, different things they're trying to get passed on for different reasons. And everyone's taking their 2 minutes at the mic at City Hall, and essentially it gets misconstrued, things get blurred, and all of a sudden we're associating an incentive to keep people out of the illicit market by creating a 420 cannabis sales tax holiday week, where essentially people are starting to medical patients are not going to pay the 6% of sales tax for the period of Friday, April 15th through the Sunday of April 24th. Is that really, like you said, is that really something that is moving the needle whatsoever actually on that? That's just basically taking a holiday and making it something that, hey, get all your weed this week.
Yeah. Thanks. Right. I mean, I don't know. The way I look at it, in terms of, for cannabis programs to be successful, whether it's right, wrong, indifferent, there's, there needs to be tax revenue generated. Businesses have to stay open. They have to be able to like turn a profit. Otherwise you can't just like operate on the dream of wanting to change the world. Right. And 420 as a day of sales, I can just tell you right now, is the like 20x larger in terms of volumes and sales than any other day of sales in the entire year or throughout the entire year. Right. So like, whereas retailers are already discounting their products because they're running Force 20 specials, they want to have a massive blowout around, et cetera. It's exciting, right? Changing the tax on that day is actually only hurting the program, right? That's the government stepping in to say, hey, we want to piggyback off of the specials that these dispensaries are running to get customers in the door and have people feel great about how the government's supporting cannabis in that particular state. or, you know, I guess district in this area, right? So like,
Right.
I guess again, it's like there's changes that are made for PR headlines, and there's changes that are made to make an impact. I feel like this is probably the former versus the latter in this scenario.
Oh, it is the season, right? With these elections coming up and all that kind of stuff. This is just one more of those things to say, hey, we're the cool people. Keep us in office, you know?
Totally.
So, yeah, it's interesting. I you know, really, I think the senior citizens over the age of 65 not being required to receive doctor prescriptions, hey, that's nice. But I think realistically, people,
it's a press release. It's a press release. That's what it is.
Right. I mean, and
don't get wrong. I want every person that's over the age of 65 to receive cannabis that needs it, right? But I don't think they were having a problem getting that beforehand. That's not getting 1,000 new patients into the pipeline that wouldn't have been there prior, right? That's just not the way it's working.
No.
So it's kind of one of those things where it's like there are things that are done to make change happen, and there are things that are done for the headlines. And you know, just based on where it's coming out of, I'll leave you to make your own decisions. I know we have some opinionated folks in the comments on there, which we super appreciate. I would love to hear the thoughts on that as well too. It looks like Trevor out of Missouri. I'm curious, Trevor, where you from in Missouri, man? I grew up in Kansas City, so I'm very curious on that. Missouri's not a big place. I mean, it is a big place, but it's not a big place. You know, it's a lot of the same things happening there that were happening when I was growing up there, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, and while we're waiting for this, you know, honky thick size colas, you know, gotta love them. I remember saying that last one.
Great name.
No one should have to get a doctor's permit. You know, realistically, if you are a medical patient under HIPAA and you're going to the doctor and you're over 21, realistically, I think anyone should be able to qualify for that if they qualify for it. I guess, you know, the determining factor with these states who are now having coffers fill coffers, right? The smokers fill in the coffers. They're wanting to disseminate who really has a valid medical reason versus who doesn't. And just over here, Washington, D.C. says, you know what? It doesn't matter if you're over 65, you just get it. Well, realistically, again, if you're someone who's protected under HIPAA and you have a qualifying medical condition, really, you shouldn't have to do anything but go and qualify. Not qualify, but basically, there should be a program that allows for that, I guess. Right? I'm not coming up with the policies in my head right at the moment or a way that we can get around this, but essentially, you know, as it comes down to qualified individuals, medical taxes shouldn't be paid, in my personal opinion. And anyone who has qualified medical circumstances should be able to achieve that, because that's what this was all. This, you think back to Charlotte Figge and a few of the people that the names are all evading me, but that's what got us to where we're at right now, right? Is the medical aspect of it. I really think it's being forgotten about or mismanaged, you know, forgotten about, not, because right here we're seeing it used for PR purposes, right? And so, yeah, and she has Trevor.
I'm curious where he's from.
Yeah, no,
it's all good. I probably know you, dog. We grew up next to each other. It says Missouri. Okay, there we go. You know, it's you know, when you think about like what the path forward is, KC, go Chiefs. It's a tough couple weeks for us, man. I feel you there on that one. So you know, when you think about like what the path forward is, and I think we talked about this with Steve last week, and in the same vein of what I was saying earlier, right? Incremental progress is progress indeed, right? And while there's absolutely things that in a perfect world I would love to see different about the cannabis space and kind of how government involvement has been there, I know that for us to get to this like end goal of where we're at, or where we want to be, which is safe, easy, and affordable access to legal cannabis, a lot of these things are kind of, some of these, like when you think about, like, and again, this is my understanding, the reason I'm not a political person is because I've just never really been able to like understand, you know, there's the impact that things make on the government level, because there's the voice of the people, and then there's what happens in the legislative system. And
Right.
when I think about what cannabis was 20 years ago, like in me, driving around in Kansas City, smoking weed in the car with my friends, right, and worrying that I'm going to get pulled over and arrested, when meanwhile, because I'm white, I had a much better shot of that not happening, right? And the fact that the rules and the system is so disproportionately, structured to put certain groups of people at a disadvantage, right? It's one of those things where getting legal cannabis passed and starting that first step, the next step follows right behind it, because now the door is open and the door's not closing anytime soon. And so it will give us a chance to where you can get folks released from prison. You can create safe, easy, and affordable access to cannabis for patients, which is really what the end goal and what anybody is working in the cannabis industry for. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's is it exactly how we want it to be? Absolutely not. And of course, there's a lot to be desired, but there are a lot of people that have the right intentions in place that are trying to change the establishment in itself. And so to that, without those folks putting in that time and effort, I don't think we wouldn't be even where we're at today, let alone have an opportunity to go where we're going.
Right.
I'm curious, is that 85 inclusive of tax, Trevor, or is that exclusive of tax? I'm sure I'll come back on that, because that is not uncommon in newer markets, but it is ridiculous. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not. Very curious though.
Yeah. So I'm seeing Honky over here, and we're talking about, so really, I guess, I'm kind of going over these and looking at this, Honky, as far as that goes. When it boils down to the medical program versus the recreational program, the train left the station, 15 years ago, and the medical, 1996 is when it first passed in California, right? And that was all about medical. What that did, and the way California passed it, it left this ginormous gray area of which people took advantage of, and ultimately the people, the other people who were looking for medical cannabis and looking for reprieve and that kind of thing were being put into a situation where they were actually between the PGRs and all the pesticides being used and all that kind of stuff, were basically being put into a spot where whether you're concentrating into RSO at that point way back when, or you're taking it for medicinal cancer reasons, that kind of thing. If you're intaking cannabis that has pesticides on it and all these different things, you're hurting your body as much as you could be helping it, and that's where these side effects come in. So when it boils down to it, if we're talking about home grow and medical availability, I agree 100%. People should be able to grow their own and not be taxed whatsoever. Then, based upon how this whole system has been chugging along here since the first state of California, voting in medical and then going into recreational, I think the biggest part about it is not to forget the medical programs and why they were established in the first place, which was for the benefit of those who found this anecdotally, as against the grain as it was, to help them in their daily, well-being. And ultimately, I think what we're losing in what's happening right now and the political awareness and the legalization efforts and all that kind of stuff is the dollar. Everyone's getting enamored with the dollar, and a lot of people who were at the base of this movement are being overlooked again, just like we were in the beginning, because we weren't very important in the beginning when we started this fight out, and it's been going a lot longer than I've been a part of it, that's for sure. But what wasn't happening before was the states weren't seeing how they could get involved, and we all know that this wasn't just a fight over cannabis being the devil's drug, or something that was going to create more robberies and rapes for the next year. We all know that bullshit from a long time ago. So really, where we're at now is needing to remember that even though we're going recreational, and that's the way that everything's going, medical and the people who need that also need to be recognized along the way. And it's not through like what you're seeing in Missouri, 85 plus tax for a medical system, right? It's not that way, but how do these states get around that and go to the next level? And that's, I think, really where we're at. Ultimately, it's a simultaneous movement of recreational and medical that I think would help that out, as to where the program itself could drive money through the people who are using it recreationally, right? I know there's an argument to be had that anyone who uses on a daily basis is using it medically. I myself use it on a daily basis, and I do believe it's for a medical purpose, right? But realistically, I'm also someone who uses it recreationally, and even though I'm a felon and I don't have my gun rights, the whole Second Amendment right and being on a list and that kind of thing, I've been part of this for way too long to believe in the system that's coming about. So I identify with a lot of what's going on in the comments, and I understand that. And I know John does as well. But we're part of this program, which is moving cannabis forward. And right, wrong, or indifferent, we're in the middle of the ugly part, right? And again, as we've talked about on different shows, and where the federal legalization is versus the state legalization is there are horses getting run over by the cart daily. It's really what this show's about, is to figure out how we end up, letting you guys, the people that can know about it, help drag these horses back out and get them in front of the cart. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know. And during that rant, I wasn't watching what was going on in the comments, but I missed anything, John?
No, I mean, I pretty much hit it on the head. I mean, look, like I said, like as someone that's, been a long time fan of the cannabis industry, and I've only spent, like 6 short years working in the space, but I've seen a lot of sides of it, had a lot of ups and downs. And I can tell you that even though it does feel sometimes a little bit hopeless in terms of like, seeing things make the floor and then obviously not pass the Senate with like state banking and like all these things, right? All you have to do is and as my old man used to say, just keep showing up to the ballpark, right? At the end of the day, the folks that care about the industry keep showing up, trying to be the change that you want to see in the space, right? And then ultimately those things are going to, come one after another, right? But like when you think about, one of the reasons it's so easy for different states to get away with things in an unfair way is because there's no federal oversight, right? And there's no like Better Business Bureau of cannabis that's out there like, putting a thumbs up or thumbs down on people's operating practices, right? Just by nature of the business, there's a lot of really fast money that got attracted to the space early on, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so like, not to say that like in a general way, like that brings a certain type of financier is why I wouldn't even call it a victim because it gave me everything I have today. But I would say that I was I had to deal with that early on in my cannabis career, right? In terms of like, people not doing what they said they were going to do. And because they have more money, you can't take them to court. And so it is what it is, right? But we just got to keep sludging through it. If it was easy,
right,
everybody would do it. It's not easy to change, not just a global perception of something, right? It's also very difficult to like inspire enough people to make it to where big business isn't and capital isn't the champion of what makes things move in that side on that side of things, right? It's activism, it's being involved, it's putting the time in to make things happen. That make it undeniable. It's like the one solid thing about the media coverage that we have today is that everything is out there and you can't ignore it. You can't ignore, mass groups of people believing in the same thing. So,
right. Nope. It's one day at a time. Shit. How many years are we into this one day at a time? So it's, yeah, just that, and really for us and for the people that we have here in the comments and that kind of thing, it's really about having a place here at TRICHOMES and having John aboard, with what we're doing here on this particular podcast to really, bring light to the things that we see along the way and try to bring them out so that it can be discussed within the community that cares about it, and see if there's any other ways that we can bring about change on a daily basis as this is actually happening. Because, for once in our lifetimes, and whether it be our parents' lifetimes or whatever, it's happening. Cannabis is having its day right now, and it might not be the way we wanted to. I'm going to say something might be unpopular for anyone who's got money in the market, but I blame Canada. I blame the way that they overshot the whole market, said they were going to supply the world, and Germany was the only one who opened up the gates and essentially brought all that money on, right? It was the green that brought the green, and there was so much money misspent on a Canadian market that was to never develop. But hey, really got people's stocks there, right? Versus there was no money in the medical market. There weren't people running and falling over each other to get involved in California right away. There was no money to be made. There was a medical market, and
it's the same thing in Canada. They put a lot of restrictions on Canadian dispensaries that prevent them from being successful, and I can leave that there. But there's a lot, and again, there are a lot of very successful cannabis operators in Canada, and we work with a lot of them, right? They could definitely be making it easier on those folks to turn a dollar, just for regulars alone. But hats off to the folks in the Canadian cannabis scene. They are weathering the storm, because not only, you got to imagine, when cannabis is decriminalized, see, the difference between an illicit market and non-illicit market in the US is that because it's still federally illegal, you still have federal support to eradicate some of that stuff. But in Canada, because it's decriminalized, there are actual illicit shops that are out in the open, like next to licensed, like tax-paying dispensaries that they have to compete with, right? And because it's decriminalized, it's not a priority. So like they'll just let them, it's basically not a high priority on the list of the government to go like cease that from happening. So like if you're operating the Canadian cannabis scene, you have a whole different sense of toughness when it comes to like weathering the storm, right?
Right.
That being said, I think not so much as I love South Park too, right? One of my favorite episodes, but like not so much as it is like the Canadian cannabis industry's fault. I think it was an example of what, like, not having like standardization around what we do with this plant is doing to like the global market, right? Because if there would have been like, if this was 20 years ago, you only learn things with time and experience, right? Like there's no other way to learn anything. And they were really one of the first to kind of do what they were trying to do in that sense, right?
Absolutely.
Especially as like a large scale global market. So, like it's never the easiest to be the first to do anything, right? In ourselves, we know that we followed in the footsteps of a lot of companies that were far bigger than ourselves when we started, right? But without those trailblazers, you wouldn't really know where to go. Where does the wagon go? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
In terms of like following the path. So, it's all just everyone's doing the absolute best they can with the information and the opportunities they have available. And the idea is that we make more information and opportunities available to a wider group of people. And then I think everybody wins from that for sure.
Oh, definitely. And by the way, the purveyors and the retail people and everybody you deal with there, John, 100%. It's just like LA, like you're talking about. And I didn't actually realize that the problem that persisted up in Canada as much as it does down here in LA and that kind of stuff. But
crazy, dude. Well,
it's
even
shops,
worse.
right?
It's even worse because you don't have a ton of like, there's not a lot of motivation. Like they're not kicking doors down up there with the illicit stores. You find them on Apple Maps. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they're right next to the CN Tower. Not that I'm like blasting them, probably like in the vicinity, right? Like but it's just like one of those things where it's like that's not like you're not hiding a track shop in West Hollywood, right? You might have been able to 25 years ago, but you can't do that now. You can't do that in East LA, especially like given the amount of businesses that are paying taxes there, they're not going to stand for like people not, and it's just tough because they can report it all they want to up there, but because it's decriminalized, it's a lower priority, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's a tough thing.
Well, and again, those aren't the shops I was mostly talking about the public markets up in Canada, and not all of them are bad. The ones that there's a company that hadn't done an ounce, a dollar in revenue, and had a $600 million valuation on the CSE, right? And had people pump the money into it, and then it just went broke. Those are the companies I'm talking about, the early Canadian companies that said we're going to supply the world, not your average shops in Canada. The Canadian market going through the same thing we all are, right?
Totally. And not to not too dissimilar from other companies, other verticals that have made that same promise and are vapor like, you know, a year and a half, 2 years later, right? That's
Right.
you know, but that's a conversation for another time. But yeah, you're exactly right.
100%. I just wanted to disseminate. I said I blame Canada. Canada. That was a big, broad statement. But no,
Yeah,
to specify, it was a bunch of those companies. And hey, you know, everyone who's boots on the ground and doing the same fight, respect and hats off. You know, for sure. So thanks for
totally.
clarifying that as well, because my broad statement.
I gotta, I gotta,
had a
I
couple
gotta
people
have
up in arms.
my Canadian brethren's back there. You know, I know it's like everyone only knows like, you know, and not you, but like it's in general, right? Like I feel like we're all operating with half information right now. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like there's really not outside of course the wonderful folks here at TRICHOMES. There's not a lot of places to get, you know, the straight story, right? And like
right.
with no like opinion or feeling, I said, I mean, I'm guilty of it myself, right? I have an opinion, obviously, about everything I talk about. Otherwise, I wouldn't open my mouth. But you think about it, and it's like, you know, you have to just, in general, we just got to continue to work to, like, you know, improve that collectively as a group, right? It's like it
Definitely,
takes everybody, without a doubt.
definitely. Right on.
Totally.
Well, and to that, you know, if Canada ever chooses to let me back into the country, being that I'm a felon, you know, I love British Columbia and yeah, BC and Victoria are some of my favorite places to visit. I went up there quite a few times. You know, I was part of that trade and did that. And loved that area up there. Just they noticed one day that I had a felony from way back, and they said, "Pardon me, would you mind not coming back anytime soon?" And well, now I'm just watching it on the news.
Totally.
So yeah. Anyway, thanks again for that point of clarification, and thanks, as always, John, for making time. I know it's busy, and you guys are on a tear up there doing what you do, huh?
Yeah, you know, we're again, to my point earlier, we're really just working on creating safe, easy access, legal access to cannabis for everybody, right? So with that comes a lot of moving parts. Responsibility. I think we're over like 600 employees now, but yeah, man, it's really exciting, and you know, I couldn't be like luckier to be a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Totally.
Well, yeah, Honky, the one thing about felon you asked, the person in front of me had a felony DUI and they were rejected from the country as well. So, I'm not specific about what the terms are. They just weren't so, happy about cannabis and or drug crimes at that point when I was asked to not come back. So, but
Yeah.
again, Trevor, Honky, everybody in the comments, thank you so much for the participation today. Really, we'll be opening this up. I'm pretty sure John's back with us next week. There's a couple weeks in March we'll be missing him, but we'll still be on the show and doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, as of now, that's about all I got. How about you, John?
It's all, man. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I appreciate everybody, contributing to the comments down there. We'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Absolutely. Till then, for the TRICHOMES Weekly Roll Up, John Bond, Self Chair Duggins. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks again for tuning in.
You as well, man.